You're listening to the ArtStation Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ArtStation Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Strike, and I'm here with Alex Beddoes.
Hello.
This episode is brought to you by ArtStation Premium subscriptions. With premium subscriptions, you'll have access to unlimited learning. You'll be able to create your own custom website. You can show off your work in 4K. You can also host blogs. There's a few other things as well that you can do. If you'd like more information on any of that, just visit artstation.com/subscribe. Also, for this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps the podcast visibility and getting in front of more people. Also, leave us a rating review for some feedback. We love to hear from you. In this episode, we were able to talk to Shaddy Safadi.
Yeah, I was really excited for this because Shaddy's been in the industry for a long time. He's been a very influential figure within the industry. He has given a lot of talks in the past that's inspired generations of artists. Mm-hmm. Currently operating as the art director and the founder of One Pixel Brush, an outsourced concept studio, where he played a pivotal role in the concept and development of Naughty Dog's latest game, Last of Us 2. Mm-hmm. And that was really fun to hear him dig into that and explain to us some of the challenges they've faced and how the production would have differed to other AAA productions. And the thing that really excited me to talk about was the challenges of the pressure that comes with developing these sort of things. When you have these huge IPs beloved by millions, the pressure on your shoulders to make sure you do it justice. It was really cool to hear him talk about that and really dig into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with this big, huge IP like Last of Us Part 2. It was also cool. I found it interesting when we were talking about artists and art directors and when actually an artist might be better at making art than the art director.
Yeah, that's a huge dynamic with the studio, which is something not spoken about at length. So it's cool to hear him talk about that, and also kind of the evolution of concept art. Because I kind of went into the conversation with the mindset of, concept art hasn't really changed over the years, but he had a completely different point of view, which was very insightful for me. And also hearing how he feels like breaking into the industry's changed compared to when he first broke in, and hearing them sort of comparisons was really insightful. Yeah,
it was cool. I remember we had a chance to ask him a few fun little questions at the end, so that was kind of cool as well. So let's get started. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Shaddy Safadi is the art director and founder of One Pixel Brush, a concept art studio whose projects include The Last of Us 2, Call of Duty, Infinite Warfare, Black Ops 3, God of War, Uncharted 4, and clients include Activision, EA, Microsoft, Sony, DreamWorks, Netflix, and Skydance. On a personal note, Shaddy is one of the artists that Leonard and I approached to validate and get feedback on the idea of ArtStation.com way back before the platform was launched. Some of his feedback helped shape the direction for the initial launch of the platform, so thanks very much, Shaddy. Shaddy, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Love ArtStation. In fact, it was amazing to watch you guys grow. I remember back in the day, there was some other imaginary art posting site and that went away. And then you guys killed it. And now it's like every single person I talk to is like, just send me your ArtStation link. Because I get emails every day from artists. And it's always nice to just save me the trouble of the personal website. Just see the ArtStation link and then I know how it's going to be organized and formatted. But yeah, work is doing good. The pandemic is been rough, but everybody's at home, and so it's actually for us that's like a freelance-based studio. It's I think it's made everybody realize that freelance out of the office concept art actually kind of can work, because I think there was a little bit more reservation to it before the pandemic. Now everybody's realizing, well, actually, kind of everyone can do everything remotely. So for us, really fortunately, business has kind of picked up even.
Good, very good. So let's start talking about Last of Us 2. What was the philosophy for art directing a game as realistic as Last of Us 2?
That's an interesting question, because for a game that's that realistic, you could argue that, maybe just find the photos and send them to the artist and maybe that will do. And there's a little bit of truth to that in that for a game like, let's say what Naughty Dog's old game, not a game I worked on, this is before my time, but when I first started there, we were working on a Jack and Daxter PSP game. And when you're designing something for a not as powerful system like PlayStation, and it's stylized. You start with the big things. You're like, what's the rock shape? It can be anything. So the concept artist would draw, and they would maybe design a bunch of different ideas for big rock shapes. That's how you would approach it. As the games get more realistic, but not just we decide they are, but the systems get more powerful, we can focus on more smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller details. But we still have the same amount of time, roughly, right? You don't, just because the game's gotten more realistic. Actually, the times have increased, right? You used to be able to make a game in a year and a half. Now it takes 4 years. But as it gets more and more granular, now you're focusing on a very thin slice of designing, and the rest you're getting done maybe with the obvious photo reference. So, for example, for a game like Last of Us, it's an abandoned warehouse, let's say, and let's say Ellie's walking through it. You might have a photo of a warehouse that works, but now what you're working on is designing the way the grass breaks through the concrete, and thinking about where did the warehouse initially get set on fire? How did the fire go up the walls? Did it burn the entirety of the roof because there were riots? Then it was in a place that rained, so rain started to come through the holes. So then how did the metal start to bend? How did the water start to pool up on the ground? That's borderline ridiculous kind of attention to thinking about, like, they call that the storytelling of the space. But that's what ends up being the thing that you feel looks really good and feels believable. It's the difference between like a Last of Us 2 and just an average, maybe looking apocalypse themed game, which is there's a lot out there, is that there's this thought of what happened here altogether. There was a shootout and there's bullet holes because of the shootout, and the guy and so when I'm walking through a space in Last of Us 1, I haven't played 2 yet, obviously. When I'm walking through a space, I'm like exhausted sometimes when I see the amount of work went in, because not just us, we do a little something and then we hand it off to Naughty Dog, and then their environment artists take it even farther. They maybe think of more storytelling. So I remember in Last of Us 1, I turned to a room and there was like a bunch of child's toys and a stroller that had been knocked over, and you could see a family had been living in here, nothing to do with anything in the official story. It's just there was all this storytelling in the space. And that's what you need the concept artist for, is just to notice. And noticing is really exhausting. Like, when a concept artist, you're going through photos, we live most of our lives not very present. We just walk around, we have breakfast. If something explodes, we might look at it, but we're not very present. A concept artist, when they're walking around in real life, but especially when they're researching, they can't just be collecting photos in a folder. You have to just look at each one and be like, what's here that nobody else noticed except for me? And what do I have to do in a concept to get that information to the modeler? Oh, an air conditioner broke. Oh, look, the coolant comes out of it like that because it's been decaying and that pooled up on the ground. And that kind of noticing, I remember Bruce Straley, he was the co-game director of, and Neil, but Bruce was the art eye at the time. And on Last of Us 1, he was really like keen on that sort of thing. And I was too. So we really connected on the value of that.
This one, I want to just pick up on something that when you say, because obviously when you walk through a space and your players navigating space, especially in a realistic game, you want like both, especially with something like Last of Us, it's like two sides of the coin. You want one side where the player is able to just go through the environment and they almost, everything falls to the sides and to the background because it's just right, because it's realistic. You look at a lot of spaces and you could run through a street and you don't really focus on anything because you're thinking, this is just what it is, this is a street. But in Last of Us, you've got this sort of extra level of detail where if I decide to focus on a particular part of the street, there's all these added layers of complexity and detail and storytelling. Is that a hard balancing act in a concept? Because you can't just, like you said, it's not just a warehouse. There's all this element of storytelling going on, but the storytelling can't be distracting if you're just navigating the space.
Absolutely. I think if that example I gave you with like the child's toys, if that was in a hallway, it would be misplaced from a gameplay perspective if you were walking through that hallway trying to get to the end of it. But because that stuff was in a side room that had a few bullets in it, when you walked into that side room, you had it made kind of gameplay sense to have something that lingered you there so that you could look around the space, so that you could grab the ammo that was in there. But I think most of that stuff should disappear for the average player. Just when you watch it, you feel that it's a little more real, but you don't necessarily know why. Maybe the hardcore art nerds know, but the average player Yeah, the average player might just like run through it.
As artists, it's the big like it's the big struggle because like say for example on a material side, it's like you spend all this time crafting this beautiful like concrete texture, and the player doesn't even look at the ground. Yeah, it's still gonna look great, and they've still got to navigate through the space and not notice it. But it like all this time we spend crafting these elements, it's like the player should not like sort of get distracted by it.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that Naughty Dog does really well, and keep in mind, I'm not a representative of them. I used to work there. I left. I started an outsourcing company, and we just did concepts for them. So the actual blood, sweat, and tears, the actual making of the game was in-house. But I think what the art director, John Sweeney, and Eric Pengilin are really good at is they're good at toning down some of the spec and some of the detail. Like games sometimes get really contrasty and specky because everyone is in business for themselves. Every artist wants to make their thing like the most awesome thing. And I think there's a really tough balancing act. I know when I was there, it's a really tough balancing act to say, yes, everyone should do their thing really well, but sometimes we might have to like tone down the detail and the shininess and the coolness of this rock so that we can have it look kind of more like a movie and a little bit less like a video game. Because video games tend to, less so now, but because games are getting, in the last 5 years, have gotten even better and more beautiful, more cinematic, but tend to have like a lot of detail everywhere. It's sometimes nicer to kind of calm it down. I know in the trailers I've seen for Last of Us 2, they made a decision to kind of make the grass really simple. Like, technically speaking, one of those things you might notice in real life is that when grass overgrows a parking lot, there's lots of different kinds. There's grass and there's weeds and there's 5 different species. But in Last of Us, they kept it real simple. And that was an art choice that's saying, no, we're not making it like real life. We're going to make it to give us some rest and some peace. We're just going to keep the grass really grassy grass.
Mm-hmm. What about the pressures that come with handling an IP so big like Last of Us, Uncharted, so on? Well, how does that affect your art direction?
Well, that's a funny question because that implies that I'm considering the audience, and their expectations when I'm making a thing. And I think, like, for me as an artist or anyone who works, relatively professionally, you want people to like the game, but you're just using your own sensibility to make the thing. You're not like, we're the ones making the game. We're deciding how it should be made. And we're deciding that based on our own personal taste. And we're hired because Neil, Bruce, and the guys above agree with us on our personal taste. So we as people, we were students once, right? And we loved certain things. And we were like, I like that thing. I want to do that thing. I remember when Neil first pitched Last of Us 1, it was his passion, his idea, his dream, his thing. And then him and Bruce worked really closely to finesse the story and to figure out what the gameplay needed to be to go with it. But they were making their game that they always wanted to play. And so when I'm doing art for an IP, I'm not considering that it's beloved or not. No matter what product, we don't work only on Last of Us 2. We work on a lot of much lesser named titles. But I'm always trying our best to do the thing that I want while considering the story and what the client wants. So the client might want something. The story is the main thing. So if you tell me that, this is going to be a very highly realistic game, then we're not going to have a sign on the side that has a funny quip or that has like a joke about Naughty Dog in it. Not because it's not funny and cool, it is, but like, I know the tone of the game we're trying to make and I'm bought into it, and then I'm trying to make that. So this idea that I don't know how every artist works, but I assume every artist is making the game and doing the art that they would like to see with some compromise. But the compromise isn't about predicting what the audience might want so much as what the story or the game needs. And then you give it to the public and you hope that they agree, I would assume. And if they agree once, you get another $100 million. And if they agree again, you get another. And as soon as they don't agree, then you don't get to make anymore. And I think that's the agreement.
Mm-hmm. So then it must hurt a little bit more than when you put your heart and soul in and created something that you like and you think would be good for the property, for the game. And when you get criticism from outside, it's more like a personal attack.
And absolutely for the people that made it, and like the art directors, Neil, John, Eric, and all the incredible artists who work there, because they're the ones who really put in like 5 grueling years of crunch. I'm just sitting here doing comms from like a base somewhere, sending out occasional strikes. I'm not in the trenches, like shooting the gun, getting covered in mud every day like they are. So for them, it's got to really hurt. But I think the test will be when people put their hands on this game. I think they're going to be like, holy crap. I've talked to a lot of people there who've been working on it for 5 years, who played it 5 times, and they're like, dude, like, I'm not biased. This is going to be really intense. So I'm really excited for them. For me, personally, the internet is a cesspool of anger and frustration on every freaking level. And there's a lot of anger out there about so many things, and it translates into comments pages and just all kinds of nonsense, but without having the real information. But I think as soon as people put their hands on it, they're going to be amazed. For me personally, I feel just like I'm operating a team of SEAL Team 6, and we just get called in to clear certain buildings. So I'm not necessarily as invested as all the people who are like there every day.
One nice thing with that, I suppose, is the way I see it is obviously it's their game, it's a game they've wanted to make. But with that, I think something that's really which comes across in the big cinematic games like The Last of Us or like the God of Wars or the Uncharted is the fact that it's their game, it's their vision, and they've not tried to please everybody. And because there's that old phrase, if you try to please everybody, you please nobody. And it's like they've got a vision and they're going to execute their vision. It's not for everybody, but it is a vision and it is tailored. Every little aspect has been tailored and designed to fit into that vision. That's why I think it's probably so cohesive. Now, with that, is it difficult? Because I know obviously you yourself being like an art director and having that creative element, is it tough when what you think is the best option doesn't align with the original creators? Like they go, I want to do it this way. And you're like, I think this is a better way to do it. Okay, well, no, we're going this way.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
Yeah, I do it. It's a delicate dance. I think that's why I can do this job from a remote perspective, because it's a delicate dance. Because you have to have artistic integrity. As soon as you give up and be like, well, the client wants dog shit. And by the way, this didn't happen with Naughty Dog because they really know what they're doing. So when you're working with people who, I found the less that happens is the more AAA the studio and the more famous they are. The bigger the studio, in my experience, and if they hired us to begin with, they've seen our website, they generally know what we're all about. Like, we're not getting hired to work on League of Legends, even though we would like to, but we don't have that aesthetic in our portfolio as much. I don't have artists that necessarily do that style, so we don't get hired for that as much. We tend to get hired on the things we want. But it's a delicate dance, and the way I do it, because I have a very specific way of doing it. The client asks for something, and they're adamant about a certain thing. We're going to do the thing they ask. We're also maybe going to do a little something that I think is the best. Like, because usually it's a small thing that's going to ruin it. Like, we want 3 more helicopters in this shot. And I'm like, I'll say politely, nicely, and firmly, I don't think the 3 helicopters are best, but we'll put them in there and then you'll see what you like. And then we'll send both.
Right.
I'd say 7 out of 10 times they're going to pick the one they wanted, and no problem. End of the day, once the game comes out or whatever comes out and we get to post it, we're just going to take the helicopters out anyway. So it's not like I can do whatever I want when we post the art. And also, who cares even if we couldn't? But absolutely, I will fight every fight, but not meanly, just really politely and nicely and firmly saying, hey, we had a client recently. We're doing this character design, and it has this like growth on them. And there's a lot of different ways this weird growth can happen on this character. This isn't Last of Us. This is something else. And some shapes here are kind of cohesive. If we keep the shapes kind of similar, it looks like a specific style of growth, and then it'll separate itself. They suggested maybe that we wanted this style, but they saw another image that we did, and they said, but can we also include this other style? Now, if we include both styles, it's going to start from my kind of bird's eye perspective, having worked on a lot of these other games that have this kind of thing, it's going to start to muddy up the design sensibility. So I will say, hey, I really recommend that we stick with this, but we'll try adding this other style to see how you like it. And if whatever one they pick is the one they pick, and that's okay. That's okay with me, because also I'm not the one doing the art. The artists are doing the art. Yeah. So they're the ones a little more. They are the ones who might get frustrated if the client is making it worse or doing things that they don't agree with. The one big thing is when the client is just going to have feedback that's going to maybe they have a style they want us to copy. This is actually a thing that happens occasionally. It's a really tricky thing to deal with. We're still in this in-between zone where people think concept art is for just ideation. The problem is, like we were talking about briefly before we started recording, Blender and a lot of these incredible softwares have made concepting so much faster that we mock a lot of things up with 3D. We can very easily, with anything we're working on, whether it's for animation or whatever, make the concept look like the final thing. Now, we could do sketches if you're designing a bunch of cartoon buildings. There are places where we want to do really loose things, but almost most of the time, we can make the concept in the same amount of time look like the real thing. And occasionally, we get requests to make the concept look like concept art, meaning look looser and look more brushy. That's really tough, because I can make the final look like the Into the Spider-Verse movie if you want it to be finally look like that. We can make it look like an animated TV show. We can make it look like a Pixar movie. We can easily, just as easily as the time it takes to make it look concept-y, make it look like the final thing. But if a client wants to make it look like concept art, that means we have to make it look worse than what it's going to actually look like, and it takes more time. And that's the only time I get a little bit in a tough situation where I have to try to nudge it in the way of just let us make it look like the IP.
Talk a little bit about artists and art directors working together, and are there occasions where the artists may be quite good at making art and may have disagreements with the art director on the quality of art that's being produced?
Yeah, I have artists sometimes that are like, I don't like what you're saying. Like, I don't agree with you. And that's great, because they feel comfortable enough to tell me that I'm full of shit. They never win those battles because it's my decision. Right. And that's just the way it's going to be. Sometimes I would say out of all the maybe 15 artists that I work with, almost all of them are better than me, meaning they're a little, more qualified. Their art is better. Their compositions are better than I could do if I sat down today. They know more software than me. They're more talented. And it's like I'm Larry Bird and they're like LeBron James. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was fine in my time. But the cool thing is art isn't dependent on your body. So as I'm getting back into learning all the software in the last year, I'm like, I'm going to get you, LeBron. And I'm like old Larry Bird. But the artists are a lot of times better than the art director and better qualified even to make artistic decisions. So because that's the case, what I try to do, what I consider my job best done, is when I don't have to do anything. When I send them a brief, they send me the thing, I'm like, what? And I think this is actually a really important point and something that isn't focused on enough. I think one of the keys to art directing, besides your ability to do it, is being nice. But not just being nice, but like getting genuinely excited about what you're looking at if it genuinely excites you. And that happens to me like 3 or 4 times a week. Someone will send me something. I'm like, how the hell did he do that? That's like incredible work. And I'm like, how the hell? This is amazing. This is incredible work. And you're a master. And I think there's a part of me inside that a little hesitates. That's like, if you tell them they're so good, they're going to know they're better than you, And I think that's okay, because my job is to push all these people forward, even if it's up the mountain, even if it's ahead of me. Now, the luxury that I have is that I own and run the company. So when they do great work and the client's happy and they pay us, I benefit. My financial gain is directly dependent on them succeeding. If you're an art director at a company and there's other people that could possibly, there's politics involved, and there's like appearing like you know what you're doing, and there's other people that seem like they might think about what you're doing and how good you are, it might be a little harder to be as magnanimous and say, oh, well, I want success for everybody, because maybe you're a little more afraid for your position or you're afraid for your job. Right. But I found that as an artist, I don't know if I want an art director who's way better than me, because he's going to suck. He's going to pick apart everything. It might be nice to have the artist be just a little better than the art director, so that the art director is constantly being like, wow, 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 instead of like, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. You know what I mean?
You basically want an art director that enables the artist. You don't want, like I said, I suppose that you mentioned sport a little bit there, and I think it's a great analogy. You're essentially the art directors are Phil Jackson and the artists are Michael Jordan. Like, you need the person to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, you can dunk and you're the best player in the league. Fair enough. But you know what? You need to bring the other people in and you need to support the other people. And although it might not be what they want to hear, that's what propelled him to be the greatest basketball player of all time. Not him just dunking on people all day. It was Phil Jackson's guidance.
Totally. I just watched this long Michael Jordan documentary. It was amazing.
So good.
Yeah, it was so good. But that's exactly what it is. And even me, like I've gotten so much in the last year, 6 months, I've done so much more art. I don't get past the comp phase without sending it to someone. Usually I send it to Eitan Zana. I show my girlfriend. I show a few people. And I don't know, there might be at different levels of art, but they all can see it with fresh eyes and give me a clear, reasoned answer to what needs to be changed or not. And I trust their judgment. So it doesn't matter who you are. Everybody needs someone. You kind of can't see, you're too close to your thing to kind of see if it's good or not. I will say something though about, if we're going to keep mixing metaphors and stuff, I'm kind of like a World War II general, and these guys are like modern soldiers. So in learning all the tools they're using, it's almost like I only know the weapons from World War II, and now I got inside with them, and I'm like, whoa, look at what this thing can do. There's a rocket launcher, and I know a little bit more about Blender and how the tools work. So it definitely has helped me, I think, be a slightly better art director, because I know what they're doing and how they're doing it. So when I give them feedback, I can suggest, oh, I know it's easy for them to move the camera because I know they did it in Blender. So I can say this. And I'm like, hey, maybe you throw a point light here to add some bounce. Whereas before I'm in like, can you make the lighting a little brighter? I don't know how. You do it how you want. But now I can get a little more specific. I can provide a general note and a specific prescription to how to fix it. It's absolutely helped. Also, for our stylized clients, there's not a lot of people who like to draw cartoony style. We have a couple of those artists, but those people generally aren't the same that are like modeling in ZBrush. But when I could pull back and say, wait, there's these guys that do really realistic stuff, and there's these guys that do really stylized stuff. There's absolutely no reason we couldn't take a DAZ model, put it in Blender, sculpt it to the right size, take that into Mar. There's no reason this couldn't work, but I needed a little vantage point to try to make a thing that I thought could work, but I needed to know the tools in order to be able to see that perspective. So I think I was slipping, and I think you can slip too far. If you're an art director that's been in the game for 10 years, 15 years, you haven't done art for a really long time, you're not familiar with all the tools, you're going to be at a slight disadvantage. You still have the eye, and that's the most important thing, maybe, but you're going to be a little disadvantaged guiding the guys or girls.
So one thing I'm really curious to know about, why, like someone that's sort of, I got all the Naughty Dog art books, I collect the art books, so I'm a big fan of them. The Naughty Dog games are always super rich with content. I mean, everything from like, the types of shrubbery, the clothing, everything is super rich in concept art. Why? And it feels like it's something a little bit unique to Naughty Dog, but why does it use so much concept art?
The main reason is they had the budget.
So, okay, but what do you do with that? So let's talk about that.
So we did I remember so I left Naughty Dog back in the day. I don't know, maybe it's 10 years ago now, 7 years ago. I don't know what time it is anymore. I left for no reason. I just didn't want to go to work anymore. And I wanted to work on my own IP. And since then, I was able to pitch that IP to after 5 years of learning storytelling and all that, to these major animation studios and stuff. And it's been an awesome experience. I'm working on another one, and I'm getting used to rejection, just like a new concept artist. But Naughty Dog initially, there was some things that shuffled around internally, and John Sweeney, who is a friend of mine, became the art director. And Eric, who I worked with there too, was another art director. Now, they both knew me and liked me. So that was step one. Number two, right. There's a personal relationship we had. Number two, they gave us a quick test. They basically said, hey, do these 10 concepts. And I was really scared because their internal concept art team is like the best in the world. One of the best in the world for that kind of thing. So we did 10 concepts, and we spent a couple weeks on them. Realistic, Last of Us, kind of what you would call a keyframe, but for what Last of Us is just a normal concept. And we did these 10, and they liked them, and Neil liked them. And I was like, oh, well, this is great. I'm glad they liked it. And they kept calling us, and I expected it to stop at some point, but they kept calling us over the course of 3 years to concept different areas. But it was tough because the game is a moving target. Like the gameplay would change. Obviously, the release date got pushed back a few times. So a lot of that concept art was often blue sky. So you'd have like a new area that they wanted to get a feel for. So they would give us maybe 5 or 6 concepts of what maybe they thought the gameplay was going to be, what they thought the kind of layout is going to be. And we do a bunch of keyframes, maybe 10, 12 for this area to kind of show what the rough idea was. Then at a later stage, if they had environment artists specifically that wanted like, what's the layout of this room? Then we would do little black and white. So the black and white were the same. We do some of the same process, like start in 3D, put a bunch of objects in there, but we do like a line rendering style in Blender, and then we could add stuff with line. So we do some line drawing on top of a line rendered sort of thing. And then we'd have these black and white keyframes that took maybe a third of the time. And so I heard that those kind of things were very useful to the environment artists there, the black and white ones. The really realistic kind of keyframes were more for just getting a feel for the whole environment. But I guess when you see some of the trailers and some of the concept art, it's actually crazy how close. I've never seen a game that was like this close to the color and lighting feel of the concepts. And part of that, ours and a huge amount they did internally, part of that is because Sweeney was really, he's a concept artist. So he was really wanting the concepts to look like the environment. But of course, there's also environment artists that can just kill it and run with it. So it's not just every concept. There's environment artists that can, create a beautiful whole level without even having a concept. So I think it depends on how experienced the environment artists are versus how much they want to receive concepts. But I think his job was to make sure it was all kind of cohesive in certain style. And part of that was just having so much concept that you could constantly show people, or even sometimes give as a proof of concept internally that, hey, this level, we should make this level. This is why.
It even just gives you a framework like that. So I'm being a 3D environment artist, just like having them concepts, even if it just gives you context to work off, okay, this is a sub-narrative going through, like a narrative that only applies to like the world. Just having them concepts to work off, and then I'm like, okay, I have some structure to work towards now. And we might, like I said, you might diverge off that path. And okay, here's like a trail here. Oh well, actually, what if we go over here and do this cool little thing? I suppose having the concepts, the more concepts you have, the more sort of tools in your toolbox. Was there anything in particular with that though? So you said, the bigger the budget, the more concepts you could do. Was there any concepts you had to create which you were like you wouldn't normally do in a game out of production, but you just had the luxury of doing this time around?
Probably just the amount. Like if you were doing a game on a super budget and you didn't have Naughty Dog budget, you might do one keyframe per level maybe that had the rough feel of the whole place, and then do a bunch of like maybe black and whites for the rest of it. So it'd be kind of like black and whites versus keyframes. But I will say that was like a couple of years ago that we were in the thick of it. Now it's so fast to do a color keyframe, like so much faster that like you're talking about the difference. One takes 75% of the time and one takes 100%. And for that last little bit, you get a lot more. And also I'm a little biased because I'm leaning towards doing finished concept art because I want to have finished concept art in our portfolio that we can show. So if you hired someone else that were really much more focused on little sketches, from my perspective, an environment artist like you, if it's a doodle, you could kind of figure it out. You could kind of piece it together. And actually, I'm curious, is there a certain amount of concept art where you feel burdened by it? Or where like you would rather have it be not so realized so that you can kind of come up with some stuff or figure it out on your own, or would you rather have it fleshed out?
I like the idea of having one super fleshed out, so I have like my point of reference for everything, and then the black and white thumbnails for everything else, so I can always infer back to the original for stuff like color palette, mood, lighting, general composition, like the balance of like noise and visual rest. I like to then have a bunch of like black and white keyframes because then I can use my own imagination. Like, okay, this is the type of like composition we're trying to craft. I don't know how we craft it. I don't know. Yeah, we haven't got any art for that. We just got the general composition. It's like, great, I'll fill in the blanks and I'll create my own little story to fill that space in. But I always infer the big beauty shot as like, it's got to match this mood and it's got to feel like they belong in the same space. I don't think I'd ever be overburdened by too much concepts. I think it's just there's certain projects where it's like, you have completely free reign, do what you want. And that's a burden in itself because a blank canvas is a scary thing. So I suppose if I had lots of concepts and I had like just nothing but completely final pieces, I think I would go into autopilot more. I wouldn't have as much free. I'll still make suggestions and be like, I get why we've done that, but I think it'd be better if we just tweaked it. For the most part, the more concepts you have as an environment artist, you can kind of go into autopilot and just be like, right, I know exactly what I got to do. There's no ideation time. Because that's where a lot of the time spent as an environment artist. I'm on a project right now, whereas, okay, I've got this big space. I've just spent today trying to just figure out what I'm going to do with the space. I've got this big blank area over here and a big blank area over there. And I know the mood I'm going for, but I'm just got to figure that out. So it's kind of, it depends what you want from your artist. If you want them to be artists and really be creative and think, that's why you hire artists, because they are creative and they do come up with ideas. But if it doesn't line up with you don't want them to go too far on a tangent, because then it's like, okay, that's nothing like my original idea. Totally. Why are you over there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the balance. There's just different environment artists who have different like preferences. Some want to be on autopilot and they just want it spelled out. And some would rather have a little bit of creative freedom so that they can feel, like have fun and be artists.
That's a really weird balance as well within studios. Because I know, so you have this like dichotomy with artists, and this isn't just unique to environment artists, this is everyone. It's kind of like the grass is greener thing. Like, I wish I was like them where I could just go into autopilot and just, churn out work. And then the guys who are doing that are like, I wish I could just be creative and just, think of ideas on the fly. And it's like, you need both sides of it. Like I said, it's the team. Like you need all the different types of players. Not everybody can just be full on attackers. Like you need people who can do the other little jobs.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to craft.
And I remember some of the art directors in Naughty Dog. I remember the technical art director, Tegan, back in the day. He's left, but he could make a level by himself.
Yeah, that's because he's a tech art director. The tech artists are like game dev is winging it. Everyone's winging it in game dev except for tech artists. They know everything, and there's like it's like I'm having a problem. There's your answer. Oh, okay. It works. Great. I'm having this other problem. There's your answer. It's like they just know everything, and that's the end of that. There's no discussion on that.
Yeah.
I'm not even surprised he can make a whole level on his own.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. This was Uncharted 2 days, but yeah, he made some incredible. There was a Nepal level where Drake ran out and there was all this crumbled building. And I remember this whole section he made by himself, and it was amazing. I mean, that was back when concept art didn't look as good as the game too. That was back when concept art still looked like concept art. Now the concept art looks exactly how the final game could potentially look.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit more into that. So how has concept art changed in the last 5 to 10 years?
3D. It became all 3D. We're 3D artists now. Yeah.
Does that bother you?
What's that?
Does that bother you though?
It's like Larry Bird being bothered that like size matters so much now in the NBA. I mean, I don't know. It's the NBA. Like now is now. So yeah, is the military sad because now we use drones and we don't have to even have fighter? I'm sad that fighter pilots are a little bit obsolete compared to drones, right? Because if you're a fighter pilot, you're like, oh my God, what? Top Gun, you want to be the guy who does the thing and shoot the sidewinders and like human on human. And there's so much awesome, there's artistry to it. There's thinking. And I think with art, it's the same thing. You have this amazing skill, all this drawing ability, but you have to figure out ways to repurpose it. And for me, I am excited. The second something becomes obsolete, I'm like, kill it. Destroy it and throw it in the garbage. On to the next thing. And I've only gotten that way because I know that fighting it is just delaying your own death. You're going to eventually adopt whatever the brand new thing is. I can tell you the grossest brand new thing that I'm like seeking out, which is a program that can paintify with a button something that is a 3D render to make it look better than most people's paintings. Not the best painters, it may not be like Jamie Jones, incredible painters, or some of these concept artists who are like the masters of masters. But if it can just be better than like 80% of the people who paint, then painting will become a button and it'll paintify the picture. Now, someone might say, well, that's horrible. That's a tragedy. Well, here's what it is. If you're not better, it's just like we were talking about at the beginning. First, we were designing the rocks, then we were designing like how the cracks happen in the thing. Let's say that painting only gets 80% of the way. Well, now, instead of spending the whole day doing the base painting, spend the last 20%, figuring out how to make it better than Jamie Jones' painting with the last marks. Why deconstruct why he's the best ever? And then let's say the technology gets to Jamie Jones' level, where like Paintify tools are better than the best painters in the world. Close the book. It's Chipotle time. We don't need that anymore. Just go to Chipotle, get your painting. Now focus on something else. As humans, I don't think our job is to battle the technology and for the arcane ways we used to do things. You just kind of have to move forward, and we can be sad about traditions and things kind of being put to rest, but we just have to move on. And I think with 3D and art, as like I said, in the last couple of years I've gotten a lot more into it. It is so fun after you go through the hell that is learning 3D. If you're someone who doesn't like to do that shit, after you go through the hell of learning Blender and the million gotcha things, like why isn't my this working? Oh, it's because there's some checkbox over here and you spent like 2 hours trying to troubleshoot. But after like a month of that, 2 months, if you really have never used 3D, it could take 3 months to learn a software. You're busting ass every day. After several months of that, all of a sudden you're a magician. You're like, what? You want a person? Boop, gloop, lights, turn all the lights. And you're like, in like 5 seconds, you have this incredible thing. And your creative mind starts to open up again. The problem is, now here's where the 3D artist kind of, concept artists who want to be concept artists that are too 3D-y, they forget about those initial art skills. So a lot of times I'll have a render, and I'll have moved the render, like I'm rendering in cycles, but cycles is too slow. So I go back to EV, but I want to see what it looks like. So I go back to cycles. Now I wasted an hour waiting for cycles to update so I can see my render nicely. And now I'm starting, because I've seen this render and I've moved things a little bit for an hour, I'm married to my cycles render composition because I've been looking at it for too long. And so I have to be like, no, take it into Photoshop and just make the shapes how you want them, not how the speed of cycles refresh is allowing you to change them. Go back in Photoshop, move those shapes around. And there's again where I need the art director to art direct me. That's when I send the image. I go into Photoshop, I change some of the shapes, I send it to Aton, I show it to my girlfriend, I say, what do you guys think of this? And they're like, oh, these shapes suck. This is total, these tangents, and this is all messy. And I'm like, you see, I got caught up in the 3D. So just because things are getting a lot more 3D doesn't mean those art skills aren't there. It's just like you have to use these two opposing sides of your brain in combination and not be afraid to break this very beautifully realized. You have a rock from Quixel that's like incredible. Well, how do you make it concept art? Well, you might have to paint over that rock to get rid of some of the rock texture, but it's painful because it looks so good. And you're like, damn it. The people who can manage to do that break what the beauty of the 3D already gives you. It's like spray painting the Mona Lisa for some people, and they just emotionally can't handle it.
But you hit it now on the head, though, because it's actually quite funny, because you're literally narrating the exact same thing that goes through the 3D community. And it's like, maybe with the 3D community, it's a bit more, it comes in cycles, like when everyone started using like ZBrush over like the modeling techniques. It's like, ZBrush isn't real 3D art. And then like we've now got, and that's how you make your textures. And now like Substance Designer comes along, which is like procedural tools. And everyone's like, that's not real texture art. Like, you're meant to sculpt that stuff. And they come in cycles like this. And the people who have the longevity to say, stop thinking of it as a replacement to your craft, think of it as an enhancement. All this tedious shit you had to do before, you don't need to do anymore. Like, you could get 80% of the way there, and then you get to spend you get to spend all your time on that last 20% to make it really pop, rather than spending 50% of your time getting to there and then half your time trying to make it, finished. For some reason, I think people get real stuck behind that wall of, this is replacing me rather than enhancing me. And it's quite funny you're saying that with concept arts. I never really thought, that's not the answer I thought you were going to give. I thought you were going to say, no, concept arts stayed fairly stable for the past 10 years. So hearing you say like it has changed, and like that perspective is pretty shocking. I'm not going to lie.
Well, yeah, I think you pointed it exactly right. It's now gives us a chance to work on that last 20%. And I think actually, which is going to be, I think maybe I'm shocked by it. I don't even like the idea of it. But the modeling and the concept art are going to merge pretty soon. I don't know how, like, if concept artists, if we could just, you saw the newest Unreal thing, right? It was crazy, right? It was crazy. And I think one of the last obstacle is when we have this good 3D concept block mesh, we'll call it, but it's basically realized with all the materials. As soon as there's a pipeline where that can just be put in the game without someone having to rebuild all the assets, right now, I think that's the biggest obstacles. We're making this concept. We're sending them a still frame of a thing that's 95% realized in 3D. Yet they're not using the 3D. Most people aren't using the 3D. I hope they are, but
I think they are in some places.
Okay.
I might be misspeaking. I believe Destiny 2 did this. Like I saw all the high poly weapons, and most of them were also the concepts. They were concepted a gun as they were doing the high poly because it's all in 3D. And this is very situational to a sci-fi shooter where they need lots of guns. But I believe, if I'm right in saying, they high poly it as concepted at the same time, and then they just passed that high poly off to the production artist and went, just do the low poly, texture it, get it an engine.
Really? Well, that's awesome to hear. So would you say that, and just to get into some shop talk for a second, if there was a way to take a Blender file, which is someone who's modeling it isn't really concerned with poly counts and all the things that you need to put it in game, do you think the technology is going to get to the point or where maybe no artist will have to touch it because the computer will say, oh yeah, we got it. We know where all the shapes are. We're going to redecimate it automatically. We're going to figure out what it needs to be. LODs, all that's going to be like click button. And now we can just give someone a 3D model with all the materials on it and have them just show up in engine.
So I've had this conversation quite a few times. I think it's going to go the route of, and this has happened many times, like when I mentioned the way the texture and software has changed over the years. It's like in early 2000s, you'd expect a texture artist to make one texture a week or maybe 2 weeks. It took such a long time. Now, a texture artist, you're making 5, 6, 7 textures a week. I can see it going the route of, okay, we still need artists to have that hands-on approach just to fix, because automation isn't perfect. There's errors, there's bugs, there's like imperfections which you need to iron out. I think it's going to become more of, and we've seen this with games anyway. You compare the size of like Halo 4 to Halo 1. It's like 10 times a game, or GTA 5 to like the first Grand Theft Auto. Games grow in scale as the technology evolves. So I think it's going to be a case of we can still have the same amount of artists. It's just the quantity of work that they're putting out will grow exponentially. But I do think we are getting to a stage where if it's hard to say, because Unreal 5 demo, there's a lot of questions still to be had, and they've still yet to unveil quite a few things. And until some questions are answered, but it looks like we are getting to a stage where it's like, okay, certain annoying limitations are gone. So for example, as an environment artist, I'd say 30% of my time is fixing collisions, fixing bugs, the UVs don't work right. I think these sort of tools are coming in with Unreal 5 might take that element out. So that 20% of my time is redistributed elsewhere to, okay, now I can spend an extra 20% working on lighting, or I can spend 20% working on foliage. Like, it's just the quality or quantity goes up exponentially with these sort of tools. That's where I see it.
That makes sense. Yeah. Do you think, and you think that with something like Unreal at a point, it's going to just make it, or whatever happens, is it going to make it a little bit easier for you to just not use that much time on one thing and use it on something else and use it on like more refinement?
Yeah, I do. I think it will. I think the funny thing is, I'm a cynic. I'm super cynical about all this. Is that, yes, a bunch of annoying things are going to be made obsolete, but a bunch of other annoying things are going to be made to deal with. So one of the things that's on my mind is file sizes. Like at the moment, we already struggle with managing file sizes of like Painter files and ZBrush files and Blender files. Okay, slap on $1 million budget on all of them things and 8K textures and all of them things. Now manage all that memory. It's like there's all this data that needs to be dealt with. Load times, all these kind of things. I'm like, that's what's in the back of my head. Like, how do we handle this data? And that's more of a practitioner issue, not a implementation issue. But that's what's in my mind at the moment. And like I said, I'm being super cynical.
Yeah, you'll have other problems to deal with.
Yeah, it's just the problems to be replaced.
Yeah, things change so fast. Just like with this pandemic, everyone's like, oh, I can't stay home. And everyone's like, oh, we stay home now. I feel like everybody just kind of like, oh, it takes a month. And then everyone's like, yeah, this is the new reality that we live in.
Very good. So we want to be respectful of your time, Shaddy. You've been great. Thanks for all of that. Let's finish off with some rapid fire questions and maybe just following on what you just mentioned with the new working environment, the new normal. What's your home office setup?
I work on a laptop, believe it or not. It's a Predator Helios 500. It's got a GTX 1070 in it, which sucks, but it gets the job done. And I have this little portable second monitor. And if you see on Facebook, like I like to work in the park. especially when this pandemic started. Like so there's this park up a road in LA that's just like a little alcove with a table. And I bought this. I researched and bought several and returned and kept the one I needed. This 1,000-watt Jackery battery. And so I set that up and I sit in the park and I have treats for my squirrels that come and visit me. There's one squirrel in particular named Woundy who had a big old facial wound. He's like face was like seriously injured, but he was super aggressive. I don't know if he's aggressive because of the wound or the wound made him aggressive, but he would always come up and he would eat snacks. So I have this little thing of snacks. I mean, literally just in the forest. Right. The squirrel eats snacks, and I got an umbrella with a battery pack that'll power this beast laptop for 8 hours. But the battery pack was like $1,000. I mean, it was like, right. It's for generating. And I have solar panels. So I bought these like solar panels. So I have this solar array and an umbrella and a laptop, and I'm working in the park. It's either that or at home. But I need to get out. And I used to work in coffee shops or in other places for stuff. But now that I'm doing a lot more art stuff, a lot of times I'm staying at home. But I'll go to any length to get the hell out of the house. And also working in nature, if in LA, especially where the weather's nice, is really pleasant. So,
What about the second question? What is the biggest mistake you see in artist portfolios?
I think the hardest thing for an artist to know is what the correct taste is. It's also the most subjective. So if you go to art school, you're going to have a lot of different people having different perspectives, and you're going to be looking at a lot of different art. And also you're going to be taught the idea that art is subjective and whatever you do is your thing. And that can be awesome when you're first discovering who you are as an artist. But really soon, as soon as you want to be a very like focused professional, especially if you want to be a concept artist, pick people and styles and things that you think are the right ones. And then follow those people, follow those artists, and start to network with people who do that kind of thing. I know a lot of starting artists are like, well, how do I break in to the industry? Well, it's the same way I'm trying to break into writing. I write something. I send it to the only person who will read it, who I know is the best thing I have, the closest person I know to a professional writer based on the people I know. Might be this friend. They read it and they're like, I think this and that. But they'll give me one round of feedback. They're not going to help me that much. With this last thing I was working on, Bruce Straley, the game director at Naughty Dog, I pitched it to him, expecting him to meet with me once. We ended up meeting, a couple times a month for a year and a half. And he helped me really flesh out the story. We like beat the story out together with cards and stuff. So I kind of struck gold with him. I think it's the same with an artist. You start off seeing who the people you are, very focusing. Like if you want to work at Naughty Dog, find out, go through the art book, and all the One Pixel Brush artists are there. And it says, I got them to say at One Pixel Brush. I'm really excited about that.
Right.
So there's all the One Pixel Brush artists, all the internal artists. A lot of those guys are really nice. And will return your emails. And you don't need to go to the top of the pyramid. You don't need to email Neil Druckmann and be like, how do I become a game developer? I mean, just who are the game designers there? Who are the people that are working there? Email those guys. Find out how they work. Send them something. Once you've watched, if one of those guys at Naughty Dog has a tutorial, like Eitan Zana or John Sweeney or Nick Gindro, who used to work there, watch their tutorials, do art till it looks as good as you think it can look, almost as good as them if you can make it. You don't want to send anyone art that you don't think is good, because then you already didn't pass the first test. Get it to the point where you think it's good. And if that takes a year, it takes a year. Then when you think it's good, send it to them. Then they'll shit on it and say it's not good. And then you'll cry, and then you get up and you try to really absorb what they're saying. And that's how it works. I think that's how it works with getting good at anything, because at the end, it's a really high level game. And one of the biggest obstacles is most people can't emotionally handle the rejection of constant rejection, especially when you think it's good. And that's the key. You can only be critiqued on something you think is good. If you think something is bad and you send it to someone, well, it's a waste. You're wasting their time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What's a favorite project you've worked on recently?
As a guy who's running comms in a base, running strikes to different things, I don't care who the target is. The artists do. So a lot of times I'm looking for, because it's like asking me, who would I most like to exchange emails with? But the artists, for example, there's a lot of guys who like cyberpunk. So we got recently a cool cyberpunk IP. There's some guys who like to design. So I always am pushing clients who are giving us finished keyframes to say, can you give us some more? Like, just so you know, we have some really good designers. Like, they can design ships, they can design vehicles, they can design stuff, and we're not as known for it. So I put a link on our website now. There's a whole section now that's called tech design. Mm-hmm. And it's got all these vehicles and things. So people know, oh, we also do design too. So my goal is to just find, if I can, IPs that the guys are going to be excited about.
Yeah.
Because me personally, whatever the challenge you give me, I'm just trying to clear buildings, and do it as best I can. And I care a lot about doing a good job, like a whole lot. But I don't necessarily care too much who the target is. The guys do, because they get more excited about a big name IP too. So of course, if it's like a Call of Duty or a Naughty Dog or a Bungie, those big names are more attractive to them, obviously, because it's more fun to work on something that's like famous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What for you is your most important tool? If you had to name one tool.
My graphics card.
Nice.
Graphics card is just this, because it ruins your life. When Blender or any 3D program, especially now that it's gotten so 3D, when that thing decides one day that it's just not going to render that nice, or it's going to take forever. Some days you're watching we're getting into some serious actually when you're watching your samples go up like 1, 2, 3, I'm like, what? This GPU, what the hell's going on? Like, some days the graphics card just decides it's not going to work. I think finding really fast gear is the most important thing, especially if you're doing 3D. Because when the graphics card is slow, you lose all your art mojo. You're like in EV, you're messing with stuff. You want to have one look at it in cycles. You look at it, it takes forever, but you want to see it from a slightly different angle. Now an hour has passed, you lost your compositional mojo and juice, and now you're stuck in like moving shit around time. Same if your Photoshop brush doesn't refresh. Sometimes we had an issue back in the day, we were outdoor painting. And people, when they unplugged their laptop and were outdoor painting, they were trying to outdoor paint. Now, outdoor painting, when you get in the groove, has to be like boom, 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 boom. But they were going boom, boom, and they were trying to do a painting like that. I'm like, you're totally screwed. You cannot do a painting like this. The problem was their laptop wasn't in high performance mode. Just the setting of low battery saving versus high performance in your laptop settings, that'll change how fast your brush refreshes, which will change how fast you make marks, which will change how fast your art juice starts flowing and how quickly you can make a painting, which helps your creativity to come out. So the speed of your gear is super important. If it was up to me, and I might upgrade pretty soon, and I had the choice between like spending my money on like a gross amount of money on like a setup, like a $5,000 with a 2080 super graphics card, as long as the graphics card works with the program, because sometimes you could be rendering and realize CPU is on instead of GPU and being like, well, you're not even using your graphics card. Make sure all those pieces work together really well. I think that's the best you can do for your art in concept nowadays.
For sure, nothing more frustrating than having a slow machine, and that affects you psychologically, and that can affect your work as well. Great. So, where can people find you, Shaddy, and what's coming up on your end?
I am around Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. I'm at coffee shops and at parks. We got, obviously, Last of Us 2. We're going to drop a ton of art for that, and the art book is going to be awesome. And you're going to see a lot of the One Pixel Brush artists. On each one of their names, you'll see their name, and it'll say @OPB. And that'll mean that it was a One Pixel Brush artist working with me who did that concept art. If you have questions or you want help, those are definitely the guys to reach out to. Me, a little bit less, because I'm helping people for a living. So, I'm making videos and tutorials for my team. So I don't have as much time for like giving feedback and stuff. Occasionally I do, but mostly I think working with those guys and getting your skills up with one of the team is a really good way to move forward. Also, I wanted to say is that we're always growing and always looking for more work. So we also do referral bonuses. So if you work at a studio internally or you're a freelance concept artist, you may get extra work that you can't do. If you send it to us, we give you big referral bonuses based on the amount of work we do. And we're talking like, could be in the thousands of dollars, not like hundreds. If you work at a studio somewhere and you hear that the art director needs more work, absolutely forward to us. Same thing applies. Doesn't matter if you're in-house or anywhere. And for us, that's if you trust us, if you like our work, if the art directors think we could a good fit for the job, we'd be happy to do all that stuff. Otherwise, I'm excited to sit down and play this Last of Us 2. I mean, yes. I only know a few tiny things about it, but we were doing environments, so we didn't really know the story too much. So I'm really excited to sit down and go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. As will many of us. We don't have anywhere to go these days. We stay at home. So
now, do you think it'll be more fun to play or too close to home? by the time that game comes out.
Yeah, good point. Thank you very much, Shaddy. It's been such a great time talking to you.
Great talking to you guys. See ya.
See you on ArtStation.com, the global hub for creative professionals. You've been listening to the ArtStation podcast. Hit subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And please leave a rating and review for the podcast. We promise we'll read them all. See you next time.